When I first set foot on Willow Creek Drive, it felt like I had found my forever home. After years of renting tiny apartments in the city, I finally owned a place where I could breathe easy. The house wasn't grand or fancy. It was cozy, with warm wooden floors and big windows that let sunlight pour in during the mornings. But what truly won my heart was the backyard. It stretched wide and open, framed by tall oak trees that swayed gently in the breeze. There was a small patch of wildflowers near the fence, and a hammock hung between two sturdy branches. It was perfect. For someone like me, who spent most of her days dealing with tough cases as a federal prosecutor, this backyard became more than just a piece of land. It was my escape, my safe haven. Every morning, I'd sip coffee out there, watching the sun rise over the trees. In the evenings, I'd sit with a book or think about strategies for my next court appearance. It was mine, not just legally, but emotionally too. Willow Creek Drive itself seemed straight out of a storybook. The houses were charming, painted in soft pastel colors, and every front yard was neatly trimmed. Kids played basketball in driveways, and neighbors waved hello when they passed by. It all felt so peaceful, so welcoming. At least, that's how it appeared on the surface. But beneath the calm exterior lurked something darker, something I didn't notice at first. That something was the Homeowners Association, HOA, which ran the neighborhood like a tight ship. They weren't just strict. They were obsessive. Rules governed nearly everything. No loud music after 8 p.m., no holiday decorations up longer than 2 weeks, not even a single flower pot out of place. At first, I thought it was harmless. People here cared about their community, right? And if following a few rules kept things looking nice, why not? Then came the letters. Little notices slipped under my door, reminding me to trim my hedges or move my trash cans inside promptly. Each one irritated me a little more, that I brushed it off. Everyone gets annoyed by HOAs sometimes, don't they? Besides, I figured, better to focus on work and enjoy my weekends instead of letting minor frustrations take over. That changed one Saturday morning when I woke up to find flyers taped to every mailbox on the street. Join us for an exclusive HOA social event. The bold print declared, "Fine." I thought, a neighborhood gathering might actually be fun. Maybe I'd meet some new people or finally put names to faces I'd seen around. But later that afternoon, I noticed something strange. Caterers started arriving, not at the clubhouse or any public space, but in my backyard. Tables went up, chairs were arranged, and string lights twinkled across my trees. Confused, I marched outside to see what was going on. That's when I realized the truth. Somehow, without my knowledge, the HOA had decided my property would host their private party, for board members only. I stood there, staring at strangers setting up on my lawn, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling inside me. This couldn't be real. My sanctuary, my personal retreat, had been turned into someone else's playground. For the first time since moving in, I felt violated, not physically, but deeply, personally. How could they do this? Worse, who gave them the right? That moment marked the beginning of a fight I never expected to have, a battle not just for my land, but for respect, fairness, and justice. Little did they know, messing with me wouldn't be as easy as they thought. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, frustration, and a growing determination to reclaim what was mine. My backyard looked worse than before, littered with remnants of the party. Plastic cups crushed into the grass, food stains on the patio stones, and even a broken chair left behind near the flower beds. It was as if they hadn't just used my space, but had deliberately disrespected it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just about cleaning up messes or fixing broken things anymore. It was personal now. Every footprint on my lawn felt like an insult. Every discarded napkin, a reminder that these people thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. Determined to confront them again, I headed over to Martin's house later that afternoon. He lived 2 doors down in a pristine white colonial-style home, with perfectly manicured hedges lining his driveway. The irony wasn't lost on me. This man cared so much about appearances, but seemed blind to the damage he caused elsewhere. As I knocked on his door, I rehearsed what I would say, though my boiling emotions threatened to spill out regardless. When Martin opened the door, he didn't look surprised to see me. Instead, he gave me a polite smile, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, "what can I do for you today?" For a moment, I hesitated. His calm demeanor threw me off balance, but then I remembered why I was here. The mess in my yard, the invasion of my privacy, the sheer arrogance of his actions. "You know exactly why I'm here," I replied sharply. "Your board held a private event on my property without asking permission. That's not just rude, it's wrong." Martin tilted his head slightly, feigning confusion. "As I explained earlier, Miss Carter, your backyard qualifies under our common use provisions. We followed protocol." "Protocol," I repeated incredulously. "You call trashing someone's yard protocol? You set up tables, played music, served food, all without consulting me. How is that acceptable?" He shrugged, still maintaining that infuriatingly calm tone. "We assumed you'd understand. After all, this benefits the community." The community asterisk. I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. This wasn't a community event. It was a private party for board members only. Don't try to disguise your selfishness as some noble cause. Martin's expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. For the first time since our conversation began, he seemed less sure of himself. But he quickly recovered, straightening his posture and adopting a more authoritative tone. "Look, Miss Carter, let's be reasonable here. If you have concerns, we can discuss them at the next HOA meeting. Until then, I suggest you review your contract thoroughly. Perhaps you'll come to see things from our perspective." His condescending words hit me like a slap. Reasonable. Perspective. He acted as though I was being unreasonable simply for standing up for myself. But beneath his polished exterior, I sensed something else. Fear. Fear that I might actually challenge him, that I wouldn't back down quietly like others probably had. As I walked away from his house, my mind raced. Martin clearly believed he could intimidate me into silence, counting on vague legal jargon and bureaucratic nonsense to protect him. What he didn't realize was that I dealt with people like him every day in court, people who hid behind rules and loopholes, thinking they were untouchable. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the HOA contract again. This time, I read it differently, not as a victim, but as someone preparing for battle. Every word, every clause, became a potential weapon. If Martin thought he could hide behind fine print, he was dead wrong. I knew how to fight dirty when necessary, and I wasn't afraid to use everything in my arsenal. By the time I went to bed, one thing was clear. The HOA had made a grave mistake picking this fight. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and soon enough, they'd learn the hard way. The morning after I discovered the flyers, my mind was racing. Strangers were still setting up in my backyard, laughing and chatting like they belonged there. My once peaceful sanctuary now looked like a party venue, complete with buffet tables, chairs, and even a DJ booth near the oak tree where my hammock used to hang. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just an invasion of space. It felt like an invasion of my life. I stormed inside, grabbed my phone, and called the HOA president, Martin Hayes. His name was at the bottom of the flyer, along with his contact information. When he answered, his tone was casual, almost cheerful. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said smoothly, as if nothing unusual was happening. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is not okay," I snapped, barely holding back my frustration. "Why are people setting up in my backyard? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" There was a pause on the other end before Martin replied, his voice suddenly firmer. Your property falls under common use provisions outlined in your HOA agreement. We've reviewed all the legalities carefully. What does that even mean? I demanded, pacing back and forth in my kitchen. You can't just take someone's land for a private event. Martin sighed, as though dealing with an unreasonable child. Ms. Carter, please understand. We're doing this for the benefit of the community. If you have concerns, feel free to file a formal complaint through proper channels. Formal complaint. Proper channels. The words echoed in my head, making me angrier. Who did this man think he was? He sounded so confident, so sure of himself, like he knew he had the upper hand. And maybe he did, at least for now. After hanging up, I sat down at the dining table, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled as I opened the thick HOA contract I'd signed when I bought the house. Flipping through page after page of dense legalese, I finally found what Martin had mentioned, a section labeled Common Use Provisions. It was vague, written in language designed to confuse rather than clarify. Something about shared spaces and cooperative use for neighborhood activities. My stomach sank. Had I unknowingly given them permission to do this? No, that couldn't be right. Even if the wording was unclear, no reasonable person would interpret it as allowing private parties without the homeowner's consent. Yet here we were. As the day wore on, the noise from my backyard grew louder. Laughter drifted through the windows, mingling with the clinking of glasses and upbeat music. I peeked outside occasionally, watching as caterers served food and board members mingled casually, sipping cocktails. They acted like they owned the place, like *I* was the intruder. Neighbors passing by seemed uneasy too. Some glanced over curiously, while others avoided eye contact altogether. A few waved awkwardly, perhaps unsure whether to sympathize or stay out of it. One elderly woman paused at her gate and called out softly, "Are you okay, dear?" Her kindness made my throat tighten, but I managed a weak smile and nodded. "I'll figure it out," I told her, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it myself. That night, long after the partygoers had left and the lights were turned off, I stood in the middle of my ruined yard. Empty cups littered the grass, and one of my flower pots lay broken near the fence. The hammock was gone. I assumed someone had taken it down to make room for their setup. Everything felt wrong, out of place. This wasn't just about a backyard anymore. It was about control, power, and the audacity of people who thought they could trample over others' rights because they held a title or followed some twisted interpretation of rules. I promised myself then and there that I wouldn't let this slide, not without a fight. Whoever these people were, whatever game they were playing, they clearly underestimated me, and that mistake would cost them dearly. The next day, I decided it was time to shift gears. Enough with the polite conversations and subtle warnings. Martin and his HOA cronies needed to understand that they weren't dealing with just another homeowner. They were messing with someone who knew how to play the game better than they ever could. I spent hours preparing for what came next. First, I dug deeper into the HOA's rules and regulations, combing through every sentence, every footnote, until I found inconsistencies. The common use provisions Martin kept referencing. They were vague at best, riddled with loopholes even a first-year law student could spot. More importantly, they didn't explicitly state that private parties for board members fell under their jurisdiction. If anything, the language suggested shared spaces like parks or clubhouses, not personal property. Then I turned my attention to local laws. It turns out there are strict guidelines about trespassing and property rights in our county. Using someone's land without clear consent isn't just bad manners, it's illegal. Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a formal letter addressed to the HOA board. In it, I outlined their violations, cited specific legal statutes, and demanded an immediate apology along with compensation for damages to my property. I made sure the tone was professional but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. But I wasn't done yet. For years, I'd kept my profession quiet in the neighborhood. Being a federal prosecutor attracts attention you don't always want, especially when you're trying to blend into a suburban community. This time, however, silence wouldn't serve me. If Martin thought he could bully me into submission, he needed to know exactly who he was up against. Monday evening rolled around, and the monthly HOA meeting was scheduled to take place at the community center. Normally, these meetings were sparsely attended, a handful of board residents listening to dry updates about landscaping budgets or parking restrictions. Tonight, though, the room buzzed with energy. Word had spread about the drama unfolding on Willow Creek Drive, and nearly everyone showed up, curious to see how things would play out. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, clutching a folder filled with documents. All eyes were on me as I began, my voice steady and commanding. "Good evening," I said, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "Some of you may not know this, but I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Alina Carter." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Martin, seated at the front table, looked visibly shaken. His usual smug demeanor faltered as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I've reviewed the HOA's contracts thoroughly," I continued, locking eyes with him. "And let me assure you, the clause you cited doesn't hold up in court. What you've done constitutes criminal trespass and misuse of power. Shall we discuss potential charges?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering behind cupped hands. Martin cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Miss Carter, surely this is all a misunderstanding," he stammered. "We'll rectify the situation immediately." "Oh, I'm sure you will," I replied coolly, my gaze unwavering. "But understand this. If anyone sets foot on my property without explicit consent again, I won't hesitate to press charges. Trust me, I have the resources to make your lives very difficult." As I sat back down, the room erupted into murmurs. People whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time, Martin Hayes looked small, defeated. He avoided eye contact, fumbling with papers on the table as if searching for something to say. But there was nothing left to say. He'd been caught, and everyone knew it. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in a long time. Justice wasn't just something I fought for in court. It was something I could demand right here, in my own backyard. And now, the HOA was going to learn that lesson the hard way. The fallout from that meeting was immediate and chaotic. By Tuesday morning, the entire neighborhood seemed to be buzzing with talk about what had happened. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance suddenly stopped me on my way to work, eager to share their thoughts or offer support. Some admitted they'd always suspected the HOA of overstepping, but were too afraid to say anything. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner, claiming they hadn't realized how bad things had gotten. Martin and his board members, however, weren't taking it lightly. That afternoon, signs appeared around the neighborhood apologizing for the miscommunication regarding my backyard. The wording was carefully crafted to avoid admitting fault, but the message was clear. They were backpedaling fast. Refunds were issued to attendees of the ill-fated party, supposedly because the event had been unfortunately canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Unforeseen, indeed. But I knew better than to think this was the end of it. While the public apology might placate some residents, I couldn't shake the feeling that Martin and his cronies were scrambling to cover their tracks. People like him didn't give up power easily. No, this group had operated unchecked for far too long, and I doubted they'd let one confrontation derail their reign entirely. That's when I decided to dig deeper. If Martin thought he could smooth things over with a few vague signs and refunds, he underestimated me again. As a federal prosecutor, I'd spent years unraveling complex cases, connecting dots others missed. This situation wasn't so different. It just hit closer to home. I started by requesting financial records from the HOA under the guise of transparency. Technically, as a homeowner, I had a right to review them, though most people never bothered. What I found shocked even me. The HOA's budget was riddled with questionable expenses, luxury hotel stays billed as board retreats, extravagant landscaping projects awarded to companies owned by relatives of board members, and hefty consulting fees paid to firms no one had ever heard of. It was all there, hidden in plain sight beneath layers of jargon and misleading line items. Armed with this new evidence, I called an emergency neighborhood meeting. Word spread quickly, and by the time Thursday evening rolled around, the community center was packed. Residents filed in, whispering among themselves, curiosity etched on their faces. For once, the usual monotony of HOA meetings was replaced with palpable tension. Everyone wanted answers. When I took the floor, the room fell silent. I began by laying out the facts, starting with the misuse of my property and moving on to the financial mismanagement I'd uncovered. With each revelation, the crowd grew more restless. Gasps echoed through the room when I showed slides detailing the suspicious spending patterns. One elderly woman stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "They charged us for that asterisk. All these years, we've been paying dues while they lined their pockets." Others chimed in, sharing stories of their own frustrations, unfair fines, ignored requests, decisions made without resident input. Each account added fuel to the fire, turning isolated grievances into collective outrage. By the time I finished speaking, the mood in the room had shifted completely. Where there had once been fear and resignation, there was now determination, a shared desire to hold the HOA accountable. Martin sat at the front table, pale and sweating, as accusations flew from every corner. His attempts to defend himself fell flat, drowned out by the rising tide of voices demanding change. For the first time, he looked truly powerless. As the meeting drew to a close, a motion was put forward to dissolve the current board and elect new leadership. The vote passed unanimously. Martin and his allies slunk out of the room, defeated, their reign of control finally over. Walking home that night, I felt a strange mix of relief and resolve. The fight wasn't entirely won yet. There was still work to be done. But for the first time in weeks, Willow Creek Drive felt like it belonged to its residents again. And that was a start. The days following the emergency meeting were a whirlwind of activity. With the old HOA board ousted, the neighborhood came together to rebuild trust and establish a new direction. It was both exciting and overwhelming, like starting over after a storm had swept through and left everything in disarray. But this time, we weren't just cleaning up debris. We were laying the foundation for something better. A committee of volunteers formed almost overnight, made up of neighbors who wanted to ensure transparency and fairness moving forward. I joined reluctantly at first, thinking my role would be limited to offering legal advice when needed. But as discussions unfolded, I realized how much work there was to do, and how important it was to stay involved. The old board had left behind not only financial chaos, but also a culture of fear and exclusion. That needed to change. One of our first tasks was reviewing the HOA's bylaws, the same document Martin had tried to use against me. We discovered countless rules that served no real purpose other than controlling residents' lives. Some were absurdly specific, like requiring curtains to match house colors or banning bird feeders altogether. Others felt outright punitive, designed to fine people for minor infractions rather than encourage community spirit. We spent hours rewriting those rules, paring them down to what truly mattered: safety, property maintenance, and shared spaces. Every decision was discussed openly, with input from as many residents as possible. For the first time, people felt heard. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves started attending meetings, sharing ideas, and even volunteering for projects around the neighborhood. It was inspiring to see how quickly things could shift when power was shared instead of hoarded. But dismantling the old system wasn't easy. As we dug deeper into the HOA's finances, more troubling details emerged. Not only had money been misused, but some board members had quietly pressured contractors into inflating bids, skimming off the excess for themselves. One landscaping company admitted they'd been forced to pay fees to keep their contracts, a clear sign of corruption. Confronting these issues head-on wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Armed with evidence, we filed formal complaints with local authorities and hired an independent auditor to review all past transactions. Word spread quickly about the extent of the misconduct, and soon enough, whispers turned into public outrage. Even those who had supported the old board began distancing themselves, realizing how deeply entrenched the problems were. Through it all, I couldn't help but reflect on how much damage unchecked power could cause. Martin and his allies hadn't just violated rules. They'd exploited their positions to serve themselves, leaving everyone else to pick up the pieces. And while holding them accountable brought some satisfaction, it also reinforced my belief in the importance of vigilance. Communities are strongest when everyone has a voice, not just a select few. By the end of the month, Willow Creek Drive looked different, not physically, but in spirit. Gone was the suffocating sense of control that had hung over us for so long. In its place was a renewed sense of ownership and pride. People decorated their yards without fear of fines, hosted gatherings without worrying about arbitrary restrictions, and spoke freely about their hopes for the future. Still, I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Change takes time, and rebuilding trust doesn't happen overnight. But every small victory reminded me why this fight had been worth it. Our neighborhood wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was finally ours again. And that made all the difference. Months later, Willow Creek Drive felt like a completely different place. The transformation wasn't just in the physical space, though that had changed too. Fresh coats of paint brightened mailboxes, flower beds burst with color, and laughter echoed through the streets as neighbors gathered for weekend cookouts. But the real change was deeper, more profound. The neighborhood had shed its old skin of fear and control, emerging stronger, kinder, and more united than ever before. The new HOA board was nothing like the previous one. They were approachable, transparent, and genuinely invested in making life better for everyone. Meetings weren't stuffy or intimidating anymore. They were open forums where people could voice concerns, share ideas, and celebrate wins together. New guidelines prioritized fairness over nitpicking, focusing on things that truly mattered: safety, shared spaces, and community well-being. For the first time, I felt proud to be part of something bigger than myself. As for Martin and his allies, they disappeared quietly after the scandal broke. Some sold their homes and moved away, unable to face the scrutiny. Others stayed but kept to themselves, avoiding eye contact at grocery stores or school events. Rumors swirled about investigations into their financial misconduct, though I didn't pay much attention to them. What mattered most was that they no longer held power over us, and likely never would again. In my own backyard, life returned to normal, or rather, a version of normal that felt even sweeter now. The wildflowers I planted near the fence bloomed vibrantly, attracting bees and butterflies. My hammock hung securely between the oaks once more, swaying gently in the breeze. On quiet evenings, I'd sit outside with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon and feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. This was mine, not because of any rulebook, but because I'd fought for it. Neighbors often stopped by to chat, something that rarely happened before. Mrs. Henderson from across the street brought over homemade cookies one afternoon, thanking me for standing up when no one else did. "You gave us our neighborhood back," she said, her eyes glistening. Her words humbled me, reminding me that this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. Still, there were moments when I thought about what had happened and marveled at how close we'd come to losing everything. If I hadn't spoken up, if I hadn't pushed back, who knows how long Martin's reign might have continued. It made me realize how easy it is to let injustice slide, especially when you're told it's easier to go along than to resist. But sometimes, staying silent isn't the safer choice. It's the costliest one. Now, whenever I see kids playing freely in their driveways or hear music drifting from someone's patio during a summer party, I'm reminded of why this fight mattered. Communities aren't built on rules. They're built on trust, respect, and shared values. Rules can guide us, but they should never divide us, or worse, strip us of our dignity. Willow Creek Drive taught me that justice begins at home. As a federal prosecutor, I spend my days fighting for fairness on a larger scale, but this experience showed me that some battles hit closer to the heart. Standing up for my yard wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming agency, integrity, and hope. And while I'll always carry the scars of that struggle, I wear them proudly, knowing they remind me of what it means to stand firm. On clear nights, I still sit in my backyard, staring up at the stars twinkling through the oak branches. The air smells fresh, the sounds are peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, I feel truly safe, not just in my home, but in my community. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in grand gestures or courtroom victories. Sometimes, it comes in the quiet moments when you know you've done the right thing, and that your efforts have made the world around you just a little bit brighter.